In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and the war in Ukraine has continued since then. Over 10,000 Ukrainians have been killed, and the situation appears to continue to escalate, with false elections being run by the Russians in eastern Ukraine. They've been condemned by NATO, Canada, and other allies as well. Now we're seeing the Ukrainians blocking ships going into Crimea and Russian threats of retaliation. Here to talk to us about that today is Ukrainian Foreign Minister Pavlo Klimkin. Minister, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start by asking you about some of these recent developments. We don't see Ukraine as much in the Canadian news anymore, but the war there is still very real. What's going on the ground?
It's actually really a shame. It's not just about this political wave of attention to Ukraine. It's also about understanding and having emotion about Ukraine. And we have real hot war in Ukraine. Almost every night, Ukrainian soldiers are killed along the touchline because the Russians keep sending to the occupied Donbass regular troops, mercenaries, and of course the whole lot of weaponry. At the same time, it's a total clampdown on human rights and everything in the occupied Donbass, and a big attempt to resettle people from Russia to squeeze out real Ukrainians and real Crimean Tatars. So real Crimeans who have their land in Crimea. You've mentioned Azov Sea and the Russian attempt of creeping annexation, but it's a mixture of conventional means we are talking about and also what's normally called hybrid or non-conventional, with a fundamental attempt of disinformation. And you need to learn actually from Ukraine, because the Russian goal is to undermine and weaken up democratic institutions also here. And you should be really vigilant and prepared for fighting the Russians in the sense of their conventional, but especially non-conventional attempts.
Why is that kind of propaganda so dangerous? For some people who think it's just Twitter, it's just words, it's not tanks and guns.
Because of real trust and credibility of democratic institutions. It's not just about government, it's about the sense of democratic society. Russian project, how the Russian president believes he had created it, it's a completely different system from normal understanding of democratic society. It's not about free and democratic society. So you can't fight directly, because Russia don't have resources for that. No, they are prepared because they have crossed any red line. But they can't also project soft power in the sense of attraction. What positive can you say now about Russia after all the actions? So deliberate attempt to undermine through cyber attacks, through the whole way of disinformation, basically creating trouble, stirring up trouble and saying, democratic institutions are not the most effective ones. So to have a kind of adversary in front of you who is weakened, who does not have anymore the sense of transatlantic solidarity, and transatlantic solidarity is basically what works against Russia, is exactly what the Russian attempts keeps targeting.
So if Canada could be targeted, and there are Canadian soldiers in Ukraine helping to train Ukrainian forces,
we extremely appreciate it. It's a great way of having not just strategic partnership and not just friendship, but being allies in fighting against the Russian aggression and fighting for the democratic future of Ukraine. We extremely appreciate it.
Is the West doing enough, though? I know you met with Mike Pompeo, and he said they will never accept Crimea being a part of Russia. And the West talks about it and says that NATO is there and sends those troops, but they're not arming you. They're not stepping in and stopping Russia. Do you think that deterrent value is still there?
We have defense supplies from a number of Western countries. Let me just mention javelins from the United States. But we definitely need more, because strengthening our ability to counter Russian threats would definitely serve the whole democratic world. We are now at the forefront of fighting against Russia. So what we could do additionally with Canada, with the United States, with the European Union would be much appreciated. It's about training, it's about sharing information, it's about infrastructure, it's about defense supplies. Of course, it's about helping us to transfer our defense and security sector up to the NATO standards. So it's a number of very ambitious challenges in front of us, but we've been working really well with our Canadian friends here.
Do you think you'll ever get Crimea back?
Definitely. Look, Crimea under occupation is going totally nowhere, totally nowhere. Now, it's, as I have said, fundamental clampdown on human rights. Even in the former USSR, the people were able to tell different jokes. You know, it's just routine jokes. And now the fear is really at the level that the people are afraid of talking to each other. It's a massive attempt to get people from Russia and to squeeze out everyone who is not, you know, a normal person in the sense of being able to agree with occupation. It's economy of Crimea going nowhere because there are no tourists from Ukraine. It's just a number of Russia who is normally have sent from Russia in a very obligatory way. It's not about any attempt of kicking off economy. Occupied Crimea under Russian occupation is going nowhere. So fundamentally, we will be able to get Crimea back. It's about our ability to counter the Russians, but of course it's also about our ability to become a really sustainable and very effective democracy as a kind of beacon for the people who live in Crimea now under total pressure and under Crimean occupation.
Does that mean the Ukrainian government has to work on democracy and corruption as well?
Yeah, look, definitely on democracy, we are a democratic society now. But the challenge of corruption, the challenge of creating a real rule of law like you have it here in Canada, and it's also one of the important points of Canadian assistance, is definitely there. And we have to be up to this challenge. I mentioned Strategic Partnership Commission with the United States we had yesterday in Washington. And one of the key topics is US, but also Canadian assistance to help us creating the best possible infrastructure of tackling corruption. Now we have corruption prevention agency, special anti-corruption prosecutor, anti-corruption bureau. In a couple of months we will have a special anti-corruption code. So it's a real attempt to go forward. It does not work like we wanted it to have from the very beginning, but we have to be up to this challenge. Without delivering on that, we are not able to overcome all kinds of challenges around the Russian aggression.
Do you think Russia will act again in other countries as it has in Ukraine?
Yeah, definitely. Look, they don't have any red lines anymore. They crossed all the red lines in Donbass, in Crimea, in Syria. So, and fundamentally, Russia is a kind of junkie. Russia, the whole society is dependent on this external, you know, drive to look like a great power, like a new empire. And the people would need more and more in the sense of this drive. And it's extremely dangerous, not only for Ukraine, but for the whole democratic world.
Minister, thank you so much for your time today.
It was a pleasure.